Hi, everybody. This is Crypto Rich, working with you to get rich with crypto, filling our pockets with crypto profits. I have with me two of my favorite political analysts and commentators, Tom Luongo of TomLuongo.me, and also Alexander Mercouris, one of the team of the Duran. And we're going to be discussing what is going on in the world right now, getting their input, their analysis, their perspectives, incredibly illuminating. Now, before I introduce them, please subscribe, follow me on Twitter, CryptoRichYT, join my Telegram announcements channel. If you're watching this on YouTube, guess what? You're not going to get the whole thing, because YouTube has a policy that there was a certain event on the 3rd of November in a particular part of the world that we're not allowed to talk about freely, because YouTube is not in favor of free speech. So that part of the conversation is going to be on BitTube, and also on Library and on Bitchute. Now, if you've not subscribed to me on BitTube, come on. You can earn some tube coins for surfing the internet, and it's a censorship-resistant platform.
Take the first step towards online privacy. Get NordVPN.
All right, Tom, Alexander, thank you so much for making yourself available in the run-up to Christmas. There was the election on November the 3rd. We're also going to be talking about Hungary and Poland and Europe and what's happening there. Anything you guys want to say, just to say hi? And
well, I think we're perhaps at one of the most absolutely pivotal moments in world history, because we've seen events take place in the United States and around the world, which the importance of which simply cannot be overestimated. I mean, this is comparable, in my opinion, to what happened in 1989, 1991, with the fall of the Soviet Union and all the communist political systems that existed around it. I mean, it's taken 30 years, but we are now approaching a situation as big as that. And maybe what we can say is now that the post-Cold War world, which is the one that we've been living in for the last 30 years, is now ending, because it looks to me as if we're now moving beyond the whole Cold War and the post-Cold War period into a completely different political, economic, a geopolitical situation of a sort that we could never have contemplated previously.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll pretty much put it. Alex has summed it up. I will go bigger, because that's my modus operandi, as it were. Which is to say, I think it's far bigger than just 1989, 1990.
Yeah.
I think this is bigger than even World War II. I think it's bigger than even. I think it's the most momentous change in human history in the last 300 years, and because we've been living in an age of the rise of centralization of power and through the rise of centralization of banking as an institution, and that era is ending. Okay, what started with the Bank of England being constituted in 1694 and eventually taking over early in the 18th century is ending here, as the central banks are exposed as not being able to run a coherent or cohesive financial system. That all has to collapse. That's what this Great Reset is all about. It is also, in my mind, the end of communism and Marxism as the dominant political philosophy of the age, which I think has been dominant. It's internal inconsistencies and its internal and not internal consistencies, it's internal inconsistencies and its failures are all around us. And the very bad people who have made all the money and made all the rent in economic terms off of this system that is failing are desperately trying to figure out what they can bring about next to keep us as rent-paying serfs. And that's what the Great Reset is all about. That's what the U.S. election was all about. That's what's happening that's what all the European politics are all about. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And that's my overarching theme for where this all leads through the next, because we're at that moment, that transition moment, moments of transition, as it were, that's going to last over the course of the next 10 years. We've hit the inflection point, and now we're on the downside. I described the election before it happened as a singularity. And the thing that we passed through, and we passed through the event horizon of it, and we're on the other side of it, and we have no idea what comes next. Well, we have some idea. Everybody thinks they have an idea as to what's going to happen. Everybody's positioning themselves for what's going to happen next. And the likelihood is chaos.
Yes.
Until something shakes out.
Yes, and you said at the beginning, Tom, something like about the collapse of the central banking system. And in my darker moments, it actually seems like it's the greatest centralization of all. We would have a global currency, global control by big tech, big pharma,
of course,
and the Davos crowd. Yes. Okay. So that's
what they're planning. Yeah. I just don't think they're going to pull it off. You see, the problem is, like everything else, always bet the over on government incompetence and central planning, fecklessness. Always bet the over on that, because they can't ever get it right. This is the great critique of Austrian economics and the great critique of libertarianism, is that in order to maintain these systems, lies are expensive. They have to tell lie after lie after lie, and the truth sells itself. And in metaphoric terms, that's a metaphor for everything that we see around us. And if we are going to open up or talk about the election, let's talk about the greatest lie of all, President Joe Biden, right? So again.
Okay, well, let's go into that conversation. And for those of you that are watching on YouTube, come over to BitTube.tv. You can also find this conversation in full on Library and on Bitchute. All right, well, here we go. So we're recording this on December the 15th at 14:24 UTC, and I'm saying that deliberately because who knows what will have happened by the time this video actually goes out, right?
My bandwidth is so bad, I've shut down my Twitter feed to make sure that no extraneous bandwidth happens, but I really just, wanted something has to give in order to try and keep up with what's going on. Everything's happening so hot and heavy right now.
Yes. So which one of you wants to start with this? Where do we go?
Oh, Alex, I just spoke for 5 minutes. It's your turn, dude.
I'm just going to say, I mean, I agree with Tom's points, but I would make just one important qualification. I mean, sure. Tom is looking at things, of course, in economic terms, and economic terms are absolutely essential because the economy is the foundation. It's the basis of everything. When you come back to any kind of discussion, you always end back to the economy, the economic framework, the financial framework, and all of this. But of course, there is a difference between economic time and the shift in economic systems, and there is political time. When I said that this is the post-Cold War world, what I meant was that the kind of people who are governing us now, their attitudes and opinions and views and mindset, their political allegiances, their whole ideas were shaped during the Cold War. Yes. And the Cold War goes back essentially not just to 1945, it goes back even further than this. It goes back to the Soviet Revolution of 1917. It goes to a whole set of ideas and political ideas that were framed during that period and the reactions that those provoked around the world. So this is a long period of history in terms of political time. In terms of economic time, obviously, we're looking at a much longer system going all the way back to basically the creation of the modern financial system, which, as Tom absolutely rightly says, goes back to the 17th century with the economic innovations that were made in England and the Netherlands at that time, with the setting up of basically a proto-modern banking system, a proto-modern financial system. You could go back to the world of 1750 and you can see how things were shaping, and it bears some resemblance to the sort of things that economists would understand today. If you go back beyond the 17th century, then you're in a completely different economic world, and it's very difficult then to make any kind of comparisons. But the 18th century is essentially the start of our modern world, and that economic system, as we have known it, is ending. Just wanted to say one other thing about Marxism and the points that Tom was making, which is very brief, and that is this, which is, of course, that I read Marx, and I read Lenin, and I read Stalin, and I read all of those people. The one thing that comes across to me about them is the very great intelligence of these people. Compare it with some of the people that we are seeing today, the contrast is actually painful. I mean, at least those people, whatever you may think of them and about what they did, they had ideas and they knew what they were doing. The contrast today with the likes of Jerome Powell or Alan Greenspan or Christine Lagarde or whatever,
Joe Biden,
Barack Obama,
Joe Biden or Barack indeed, is excruciating. Yes. So I do want to make that one.
No, that's a brilliant point. Is that I've come to the conclusion about Marx that he didn't create anything new.
No.
He didn't. Marxism isn't a new idea that was birthed in 1848, but all what he did was describe the impulse of sociopaths towards tyranny. This is how they create tyranny over time, and he created and he described the monarchy and the breakdown of it, and then this is what is going to happen when a new system is when you unleash an unquenchable amount of envy and anger and frustration, but it's not the new system of the world at all. And this is going to be a painful lesson for modern leftists today to bear, because they don't understand it. I was on fault lines yesterday and sparring with Jamal Thomas about this, who was one of these thoughtful modern lefties. And the minute I said Marxism is the dominant political philosophy of the age, he just lost his mind. Like, how can it? I didn't even think that was an arguable point. I was conceding the fact that my ideas as a libertarian are nowhere in the political philosophy of the age, right? These people are the worst winners I've ever seen, because they've won every major political battle of the last 100 years, right? And I've been making this point forever. And so this is what we have today, and they're right there stealing an election in the United States on these same principles, complaining, just like I've heard from every moldy old commie my entire life. Well, they just didn't do communism right yet. Well, as a scientist, because I am a trained scientist, I am a degreed chemist, and 25 years as a laboratory manager and research chemist, I've read a paper or two in my life, and I've designed an experiment or two in my life. And the important thing here is that when you're designing an experiment, you're not designing an experiment to prove hypothesis. You're not saying that your hypothesis is true and then designing the experiment that way. You can't beg the question. And the way if you listen to the way these people talk, it's like we just have to keep fitting the data to make our hypothesis true. So we'll throw out all the data we don't like, Stalin's purges, the killing fields, blah, 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 all this stuff, and blame it all on capitalism, which is the most insane, rotten nonsense I've ever heard. This is why this guy, Richard Wolff, is one of the most dangerous men in the world, by the way, because it's exactly what he does. And it's one of the most intellectually dishonest things I've ever seen. It actually makes me angry that RT even gives him an audience. But they have their ideological biases as well. So when you look at all this stuff and you see what's happening, you see the impulse to tyrannical rule, and it has to reach its crescendo, because they cannot admit failure until power is wrested from them bodily, or the entire system collapses and they kill everyone, and then they're king of the ant pile. And then we have Russia in the 1990s.
Okay, now I want to take it, Tom. That's great, and I want to take it away from the theoretical to actually what's happened, happening, and where it's.
I think it's important, everybody, that we just define terms and define the intellectual landscape. It's important.
Sure. And then I can locate myself, where Jamal Thomas is, in terms of my left wing politics, right? However, I think what's key, because I'm so left wing that I think I end up with I'm with the anarchists. Decentralization.
Well, there's not that much difference.
Freedom. No, there isn't. There isn't.
It's a circle. What we're arguing about is implementation, not specification.
Sorry, Tom?
Right? We're arguing about not what the problems are, but how to solve them.
Yes.
Which are fundamental. Which is a different process. And unfortunately, the intellectual dishonesty of this is me putting my intellectual bona fides on the table. I'll say, look, where this fails is the dishonesty comes from modern leftists, is where they conflate specification with implementation on pragmatic terms in order to avoid foundational, fundamental questions of philosophy. And they do it all the time. And it's unbelievably annoying when, if they would just give that up, they would stop being Marxist. That's one. And because they would understand that we're right and that we have the answers for them, or at least some of the answers, not all of them, because there's no one answer for everyone. But there is a best practices that we can try and achieve. And at the different levels of human community, we can allow for 1,000 flowers to bloom. So those people over there want to run a commune, go right ahead and do so. Just don't force it on me. That's very libertarian. Okay. That's the thing, that they can't do that because they understand fundamentally. And I hate to keep using the they construction because it's overly aggressive from my perspective here. But to say, look, you cannot. They can't do that because they can't win unless they get everybody in their system.
Yes, it's the one size fits all.
That's the problem.
Yeah,
that's the problem.
Yeah,
and
one size fits all that doesn't work. That's oppressive and fascist.
It doesn't.
And authoritarian.
Of course, it is.
That's what
it is.
But complete harmony. Now, so look, let me just, as I understand it, this is where we're at, right? So there was an election, and because we're on BitTube and Bitchute and Library, I can say this freely. There was an election on November the 3rd, 2020, for the U.S. president, and Joe Biden